reclassed as a cursed land. You'd have to be mad to settle here. And yet, welcome to King's March!
Welcome back, you filthy exiles. So, this morning's reveal was awesome. If I had one word to explain it, absolutely awesome. I have no real negatives to say about what's been announced, and just in case you missed the reveal, I thought I'd run through what's coming to the game. And also, I've went through the patch notes now. The video will be up very shortly. I've did it on live stream this morning with everyone. And there's a fair few wins, there's a few losses in there, and things that I predicted would happen, such as the nerf to Adorn, have happened. And that was just like an inevitability. But anyway, what I will say is this is probably one of the greatest league announcements I've ever seen from GGG in 11 years. It's made solely for the community at this stage, and I could not be more excited. And the fact that Diablo 4 even thought that it could even contend with Path of Exile this morning is wild. But anyway, let's get into the video. And also, don't forget, if you're not subbed to the channel, make sure you do that. And also hop over to the Twitch if you get a chance, and you can catch me live stream. I'm on there pretty much every other night. But anyway, let's get into some of the stuff that we're getting out of the next 3.25 league.
It's not much yet, but with your help, we can erect the greatest city Reclassed has ever seen. We'll need resources and savvy planning.
Okay, so there's a lot of stuff happening in this patch, so I thought I'd break this down into 3 parts, and yeah, let's get into it. So the first one is the mechanics that we're getting from the actual settlers of Kalguur. And yeah, these are some of the things that they mentioned that we'll be getting as of this morning. Okay, so the first thing they mentioned was shipping routes, which will be automated in the back end. So when you go and map and things like that, the ship will go out, it'll go do the trade route based on a timer, and will come back and deliver you a ton of loot. Now, this will be based on risk. So depending on how risky the shipping routes are, based on who you're trading with and where you're trading to, will depend on whether or not the ship can make it. And it's also determined as to whether or not the staff that you put, or the employees or the workers that you put on the ship, are equipped enough to defend it from things like pirates and things like that. Basically, this is a free loot provision, and yeah, this is just going to be wildly profitable, hopefully, from what we've seen in the teaser trailer. Okay, so another new system they mentioned in the new league mechanic was automated mapping, and basically how this works is you queue the maps up in your township, and you have a worker go off and farm the maps for you. Now, in the Q&A, they basically said, like, it's not foolproof. You're not necessarily going to get all the best drops from it or anything like that. And there's also a chance that your workers can die within those maps as well. And yeah, it's just overall a really cool mechanic. It's basically AFK loot generation, AFK mapping. Okay, so the next one is Recombinators have been added back in as like a crafting mechanic with idling in the King's Landing area, or the township that you design and put together. And yeah, basically how this works is from Sentinel, you could cram 2 items together and take a chance as to whether or not you get a really good outcome in the combination of those 2 items. Yeah, overall, this was a really cool league mechanic, and it's good to see it back in the game. Okay, so the next thing they mentioned was the introduction to gold into the game. And this will serve 2 purposes. Number 1, to be a substitute for regrets, so that you can respec your character on the fly. And based on how they announced it and how they explained it, this will be on a sliding scale. So the lower levels, you'll have less gold cost, and at greater levels or higher levels, you'll have more gold cost as you'll be playing the game more, and you'll be generating a lot more gold. And beyond this, we're getting the currency exchange. Basically, in the Q&A, they mentioned that they were going to do a bit of a test run and see how that works in the main game, because obviously they're putting this in place for Path of Exile 2. So yeah, we'll be able to fully automate bulk trading, and apparently this will work while you're out and mapping and things like that. And so yeah, once you get your trade executed or whatnot, it'll instantly just pop into your currency exchange stash, and then yeah, you go pick it up, and Bob's your uncle, you're done. This is a huge buff, and we'll be talking about this in a video I'll be putting out later today in relation to how this is going to interact with Delve. But from what I can see, we could also see in the tabs that things like tattoos also have been given a tab. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where this goes, but it looks like we'll be able to do quite a bit with this and streamline a lot of trading just within the game UI instead of having to do the manual system or TFT approach moving forwards. Okay, so outside the main league mechanic changes, and the list I've done here is not totally exhaustive, and a lot of the stuff that I'm going to go through is pulled from the patch notes too, but there is an absolute monolith of content being added and adjusted in the game. In particular, melee has been totally reworked, so our assumptions were in fact totally correct. Anyway, let's get into it.
Like before, there are passive skills that allow you to invest in bleeding and block. We've designed new skills replacing some of the old ones. Like this, War of Attrition, which is very handy for long sustained boss fights. Further alongside the Gladiator theme, this new passive allows you to combine different weapon types while dual wielding to get a variety of powerful bonuses. For example, holding a dagger will give you more critical strike chance, while holding a mace gives you more area of effect. Of course, you could just use Varanastra for all weapon type bonuses. And finally, we have a new notable which allows you to invest in the newly added Retaliation skills. These are active skills which require you to meet a certain condition in order to use them. Once you meet that condition, you can unleash devastation on your foes. As a result, we've straight up removed the Raider, rest in peace. And we've added a new class in its place, the Warden. This class is largely inspired by its predecessor from the Affliction League, with a few changes. The Warden now focuses on elemental attacks, changing the behavior of shock, enhancing freeze, and replacing ignite with scorch. There's also a skill that allows you to go ballistic with your elemental damage, periodically. The class also grants Barkskin, which is a skill that can be used to mitigate physical damage from hits.
Okay, so another major change is the Chieftain has been pretty significantly overhauled on its Ascendancy too. So the Tawahoa's point has now been removed from the game, which nobody really used anyway. And Moon's Presence has now been turned into a Warcries have infinite power node, which basically means to me is this Ascendancy is designed entirely now for using slam skills or strike or melee skills and has all the tank ability that goes with it, especially with all the other Ascendancy points that it does have for tanking. And beyond this point, it also has Tukahama's War's Herald, which gives you increased Fists of War damage as well, so it just makes sense that you would run slam skills like Tectonic Slam and Earthquake and whatnot on the Chieftain moving forwards if you're going to go the Marauder route. Okay, so the next thing that's played out in this league is the removal of attack totems. So that means your Protector totems and your War Chief totems and the Earthbreaker support gem as well. Now, in compensation of the support gem, essentially what's happened is they've baked the Earthbreaker configuration into the Dawnstrider unique boots, and in fact of that they've actually then buffed Earthbreaker as well, just for good measure. So you also have a buff to the skills and a buff to the actual Earthbreaker node within the Dawnstriders to compensate for the fact that it'll now be a 5-link setup instead of a 6-link setup. But what we'll probably find is you'll be able to play Slam Totems again because it'll be viable both because of the total melee buffs, which we'll talk about next, and also because the Dawnstrider boots have also had their Earthbreaker compatibility buffed as well. Okay, so beyond the totem reworks, basically all the melee skill gems have been reworked. So with things like Blade Storm, if we pick on this, we're looking at scaling up of upper ends to 291% from 150%. Things like Chain Hook, for example, which I joke about every single league, have been buffed from 169% to 393%, which is just absolutely absurd. Beyond that, Cleave, 511% from 237%. Basically, the more we keep going down, we keep finding Dominating Blow has been buffed to 458% from 238%. Doriani's Touch, which is the old Lightning Slam gloves that you get, is now buffed to 1000% from 600%. Essentially, I can't find anything that's dropped off in these patch notes. Almost every single melee skill has been buffed. Now, the only thing that you need to keep in mind with this, though, is basically things that stack trauma. For example, like Glacial Hammer. If we look up trauma, if I could spell trauma. So trauma has been nerfed. So basically the upper end of trauma at 24 damage at level 20 has been dropped to 17. And that's because if we look at things like Glacial Hammer, this has been so severely buffed that it totally outcompensates. So 622% from 269%, making Glacial Hammer absolutely absurdly damaging if you wanted to play the old Glacial Hammer trauma stacking builds. Slam skills are also in the rung here. Herald skills have been buffed. Heavy Strike is now totally viable to play at 552% from 313%, and this isn't taking into account other things like the itemization or whatnot. Things like Ice Crash are now back on the top of the table as far as heavy damage dealers, so 611% from 350%. But I'll do a table up later in a quick video basically covering off on all the percentage shifts between the different skills and how significant it is. But melee is definitely going to be the contender for the most popular builds this league, hands down among all other things. Spellcasters are pretty much, there's no real major changes. Other observations I made when looking at the skills too were just around things like Chaos Dot skills. Some of the Chaos Dot skills were improved, so potentially there's some potential for those skills to excel again, like Edie, Contagion, and whatnot, and Bane, but we'll see how we go this league. Okay, so another major change that's coming into 3.25 is Magic Find item quantity is being removed entirely from the game, and that means it's being removed from all items and everything else in between. Now, I have no love for Magic Find, but I know that there's a lot of people that do. Basically, my interpretation of how this will work moving forwards is you simply stack up rarity, and it'll be a culmination of rarity gear that attributes to better drops dropping later in the game, or when you choose to pursue Magic Find moving forwards, as opposed to having to then balance two stats being item rarity and item quantity, and inevitably everybody just stacked item quantity ultimately at the end of the day. So basically from all the items that I could see, Bisco's Leash is basically just nerfed, which used to be pretty commonly used. Beyond that point, like Thief's Torment's been removed. Gold Worm Boots, which are pretty common in Magic Find builds, have now been enhanced to have 20 to 40% rarity. Things like the Pariah Ring no longer has increased item quantity per white socket, and instead it's increased item rarity. For now, who knows how this will work, but yeah, no, I am not negative to this at all, and unfortunately this will upset a number of Magic Find players. Okay, so another thing that's coming back is the Nameless Seer, which was from the 3.23 Affliction League, and this was actually a really good one to pick up easy Mage Bloods and stuff like that by pure chance, but it's good to see it come back into the game. So beyond that as well, the King in the Mist is now accessible from the Affliction League, and the way that this is now accessed is through an item or a map encounter that comes up in the rituals as you complete Ritual League content, and essentially then you just plug that into your map device, and yeah, you can go fight the King in the Mist. Now, the other thing as far as that which was taken, that's not coming back to the game, but basically what it looks like is they've converted that item into the Perendus Pact item from 3.24, so now you can get the benefits of your Perendus Pact stacking from 3.24. It just looks like that which was taken item moving forwards. Beyond that, you can now encounter the Wildwood again, and you can now use this in T16 and 17 maps to juice your endgame content up with Wisps. Sentinels from the previous Sentinel League, which I think was back in Calandra, are also added to the game. Basically, you just hit these in maps and they follow you around and they buff everything up. Similar to what they used to do, but they're no longer an item nor a recombination item as far as what we know. Now, the biggest one that I'm the most excited for out of all these things coming back is you can now encounter reflections from Lake of Calandra. Now, the reason why this is so awesome is because this means that we can have negative stacked or negative resistance items, reflected items, as we did back in, I can't remember what the league was now. So things like Doriani's prototype builds, which was used in absolution builds and or lightning stacking builds, where you basically stacked negative lightning resistance, and then that applied to your enemies around you, and then your armor recompensated for your lightning resistance to take on board that damage, can now be playable again, which opens up a whole new archetype of builds to be played in PoE all over again. And from memory, some of those absolution builds were absolutely off the chains from the damage standpoints. And we've also got Melian and Ephemeral Edge builds would be heavily buffed up by this mechanic as well, conditional to you stacking armor. Okay, so aside from some of the, or if not all of the awesome things that are coming this league, there's also a few downsides that I could see coming out of the patch note. Okay, so the first ones off the marker, obviously both Grace and Determination have been hit with 50% nerfs. We already knew that from the teasers. Basically what we can see is the buffing that will counterbalance this will be a lot of the new base types, as well as a lot of the new multiplicative quality modifiers. But these are the first two things I noticed in the patch notes that sort of stick out. Okay, so beyond this nerf, Defiance of Destiny, the unique amulet, has now been nerfed as well. So it now causes you to gain 10 to 20% of missing unreserved life before being hit by an enemy to be accumulated instead of 25 to 35%. So this is a pretty significant nerf, and it's in line with the next spate of nerfs that I'll talk about, just around the conversion of physical to elemental damage, which basically means that things like Lightning Coil and the Cloak of Flame are probably not going to be as favorable moving forwards as well. The Adorned has also been hit by the Nerf Hammer. Essentially, this item was just out of control in the first place, and with things like Voices being made a hell of a lot easier to access for this league, it makes sense that they would have reduced this item's ability to buff you up. Also, everything's been buffed anyway. I don't for a second think that this actually makes the Adorned bad. The Adorned is still incredible, even at 100%, with everything buffed by, you know, a multiplier of 1 to 200%, with Voices being more active in the league as well from Delirium and Simulacrum encounters. I don't think this is necessarily the nerf that people may play it up to be, and in fact, you'll still see tons of builds stacking Adorned to take their builds up to that next level. So this is sort of a nerf, but it's not so much of a nerf masquerading as a hard nerf. Okay, so as I was talking to just earlier, basically there's a bunch of patch notes items that speak to physical damage taken as an elemental chaos no longer rolling on specific items, i.e. from Delve, which was pretty common. And then, yeah, also modifiers no longer being available on the Watcher's Eyes to buff up the Purity Auras, i.e. Purity of Fire, which was used pretty heavily with Cloak of Flame. And then basically the Veiled modifiers as well appear to have been taken away and substituted out with Warcry buffing. And this leads me to believe that things like Lightning Coil and the Cloak of Flame and Defiance of Destiny, which has already, just as I noted, been nerfed, basically things that GGG wants to move away, full physical conversion, and you're just going to have to use other modifiers such as block, for example, seems to be a big contender here, or spell suppression and other things like that. Okay, so the next one is on the Juggernaut Ascendancy. Unbreakable has been essentially removed or changed, and this now basically does the same as what a Fourth Vow does, which 15% armor now applies to chaos damage taken from hits. Now, I don't necessarily think this is the nerf that we think it is for a number of reasons. Number one, they've changed the way that endurance charges work, so you don't get elemental resistances anymore, but it's a reduction to elemental damage, and also you get +1 additional elemental damage reduction per endurance charge moving forwards. So you have the potential, if you've got 6 endurance charges, to get up to 30% elemental damage reduction, just flat elemental damage reduction. I don't necessarily think that is a bad thing. I think we may actually find that that's more powerful than what we had previously on the Jug, but you know, the jury's out for that. We'll see how we go on the league start, but I might do a separate video just to break down how I'm going to work around defenses with my Shield Crush build in relation to this, but I think it'll actually end up being tankier. Okay, so the final one that I'll go over is Call to Arms and Enduring Cry. So I'd made comments about this in one of my videos, and I was absolutely correct. So there you go, I told you so. So Call to Arms is now being renamed to Auto Exertion. It's now going to reserve 15% mana per socketed Warcry to cause those Warcries to repeatedly trigger. So as opposed to the previous one, you could only do one Warcry, you can now do multiple Warcries, but the cost of that is going to be 15% mana reserved per Warcry. Now, outside of this too, it looks like the cooldown reduction is going to be in a less favorable position, but I'm not doing maths on my day off, so yeah, let's just go with that. Now, Enduring Cry, you're no longer going to get the initial burst of life regeneration, and so it's going to be less of a appealing Warcry to use moving forwards. There's definitely going to be others that I would actually prefer to use, I think, such as Rallying Cry or Ancestral Cry moving forwards, which are going to give you a lot more benefits. And even Seismic Cry is going to stack up a lot more armor and make you tankier. So potentially they're actually better solutions, and you can just generate your regeneration through other means. But yeah, both of these have been hit with the nerf hammer. Okay, so I didn't cover absolutely everything in this video. There's just an insane amount of things in the patch notes. It's 30,000 words and took about an hour and a half for me to go through on stream. But for the most, the patch notes look pretty good. It's an overall melee rework. Spell skills haven't been touched. The defenses have been counterbalanced out. And without going into the skill tree in great detail, there are a ton of skill tree changes. One thing that I think I missed out on here is they've added tinctures back into the game as well, which is going to buff melee up. So that's really good, and I'm super keen for all the new skills that are coming out as well. So the retaliation skill set I actually think are really cool, and I'm probably going to do my second build as a gladiator, and I'm going to be specking into a facebreaker bleed retaliation configuration. But we might do some theory crafting later if those skills hit up into PoB. Anyway. If you like this video, don't forget to like and sub, and there are more videos planned to be coming out later today, and I will see you guys later. Have a good one.